And our first day lesson is the Titanic, the ship, its sister ships, and its journey. So the first thing is Titanic was owned by the White Star Line. White Star Line was the company that had the Titanic built and ran the Titanic. They're the ones that put the people on the ship to work it and who sold the tickets for it. It was considered an Olympic class ocean liner, which had to do with the size and how many people it held. And it had two sister ships, the Olympic and the Britannic, as they mentioned on the video. Now, what they didn't mention on the video was that their sister ships for the Titanic had issues as well. Its one sister ship was the Britannic, and it sank in 1916 after it hit a mine. And the Olympic actually had two accidents. It hit two ships, but it never sank. It ended up being scrapped in 1935 and after it was decommissioned. So all three ships were kind of cursed. Like, they all had some types of problems here and there. The next thing on your paper is the timeline for the Titanic. So as you saw, 1908, the design for the Titanic was approved. And in 1909, the first part of building the ship started, and that's when the keel was laid. Now, this is not perfect by any stretch, so bear with me. But the keel is the bottom part of the boat. So that's the first part they have to put down. So they build that, and that's what the rest of the boat is built off of. So that was laid, and it's out of steel. So that's also one of the hardest parts of the ship. They say that when the ship sank, that was probably the last thing to go because it was such heavy and such strong steel that that would have been the last thing to break when it went down. The hull was launched. Now this is the hull, the bottom part of it, was launched in 1911. What that means is after they built this part, the keel, they built the hull up from it, and they had to sail that, like they had to put it in the water and transport it to the shipyard that built the rest of the ship. 1912, January of 1912, the boat was complete, and they started putting other parts on it for decoration and for necessity. They put 16 lifeboats on it in January of 1912. There ended up being a total of 20 that they put on it. Unfortunately, that would only hold 1,178 people. Not nearly enough to serve everyone on board if something happened, but they also said the ship was unsinkable. The reason they said that is because there were compartments throughout the boat that were supposed to hold water, so if the ship hit something, they would seal off, they would close up, and the water wasn't supposed to go anywhere else. It's just when it hit the iceberg, it damaged the boat so much that the watertight chambers couldn't stop the water, so that's how it sank. And we'll go over more of that later in the week. We actually have a whole lesson about that. So in April of 1912, it ran through its trials to make sure that it was ready to ship, or ready to sail. And April 10th of 1912, the Titanic took off on its maiden voyage. That's its first voyage, the first of what was supposed to be a lot of trips from England to New York. April 14th, at 11:40 p.m. is when the iceberg was spotted and the Titanic hit it, as I said in the video. And at 11:50 is when it was reported it actually started taking on water. So they weren't sure what was going on. They just knew they hit the iceberg, and they got calls from the engine room that they were getting a lot of water on board the ship. April 15th at 12:25 a.m., so like into the morning, from night to the next morning, is when the first lifeboat got launched, and there were only 28 people on it, and it was supposed to hold 65. So they did not do very well with that, but they weren't really taking it seriously. They didn't realize that the ship could actually sink. This is also where women and children first came in. They wanted all women and children to board the boat first, so they would be the survivors. 2:05, so not even 2 hours later, the last lifeboat went off the ship, and there were still 1,500 people still on the ship. 2:20, 15 minutes later, the ship went down the rest of the way, completely sank. So that was it, it was gone. There were ships that came by and picked up survivors, which is something else we'll talk about later in the week as well, but that was it was gone. And then September 1st of 1985 is when the wreck was discovered, which we'll also talk about later this week. The thing is, there could have been a lot worse too. There were 3,547 people could have been on board the ship, and they had 2,229, so there could have been even more loss of life. 1,316 passengers, 913 crew members were total on the boat, and 1,503